Welcome to Gale Force Conversations with members of Music NL. In today's episode, we chat with Dwayne Andrews. Born in Carbonear, Newfoundland, Labrador, Andrews grew up exposed to a melange of cultural influences, and his development as a guitarist reflects that. After graduating from the Jazz Studies program at St. Francis Xavier University with honors, Andrews spent several years studying contemporary music composition in France. Thanks for joining us.
Well, we are in the beautiful Slanche restaurant in downtown St. John's, overlooking the beautiful harbor, and what a great day it is to be in conversation with musicians from music, Newfoundland and Labrador. Dwayne, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Duane Andrews, and it's great to be here.
Dwayne, where are you from originally?
I was born in Carbonear.
Yeah, how'd you grow up? Music a big part of your life?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been playing the guitar. I mean, that's the main thing I do is play the guitar, and I've been doing that for as long as I can remember, really. And a few things I recall are my mother starting to learn the guitar, and that was I was around maybe 8 or 9, and so there were always guitars. It feels like there were always guitars around the house, but I remember when she was taking lessons, and then my sister started taking lessons around the same time. So we had these two kind of precious guitars that came into the house all of a sudden, and they just had this kind of, alluring quality to them. So really it was just from kind of watching her, and I remember even kind of looking at the sheets that her teacher would give her and just trying to figure that out even at that age. And then I remember in grade 5 we had a guitar group in elementary school. So Davis Elementary, Carbonear, Newfoundland. Thank you, Paul Lambert. He was the teacher back then. And we started with, there were 2 different groups. So there was what was called the pickers. So we'd be like playing picking the melodies of songs, and we'd have the strummers. So I started in there as a strummer, and my sister, I remember, was actually a picker in the other group. So those are some of the earlier memories. Yeah.
Dwayne, you bring back memories for me. So I have a sister who started on the violin, a brother on the trumpet, and me on the trumpet. Those instruments are not very nice to listen to when you're learning. So I think the guitar might be a little bit easier to handle for family.
There's definitely some, guitar, piano, you can kind of get a nice sound pretty quickly. But definitely trumpet, violin, takes a little more patience, at least, you could say.
Yeah. Do you remember the first kind of music you were working on? What kind of...
Yeah, back then, like Simini was big around the house. I remember, too, and Simini, for people who aren't familiar, that's kind of like Newfoundland country music, basically. So like traditional Newfoundland music and country music mixed together. And this was in the 80s, so, kind of early, mid-80s. I remember as well, like we'd go, around that same time we'd go camping a lot, on the weekends. It was classic Newfoundland family, the weekends in the summer, you just hit the parks.
Right.
And usually there'd be, a good slew of relatives and friends, that, families and stuff, all meeting up in the different parks, and it'd be literally around a campfire. There'd be, I just remember, songs coming out all night long, but a lot of that would be old style country, old school country, Willie Nelson, that kind of stuff, and then along with the old, like traditional Newfoundland kind of Irish, Celtic sort of songs as well. So those are probably the 2 main influences at in the early days.
Any one person that stood out to you that, said, wow, that's impressive?
I remember my Uncle Ern. So actually I had an uncle on my father's side and an aunt on my mother's side. And they were both kind of renowned musicians. So my Uncle Ern, it was like he kind of had one of every instrument. And any time he came over, and he knew I was interested in the guitar, so immediately we just started talking about guitars. But then it would grow, and we'd talk about mandolins and dobros over the years. And so we kind of maybe broadened my sense of what maybe music was in some ways. And I remember, again, I was small enough that when I'd sit up in the chair, my feet wouldn't touch the floor, and I learned to pick this tune called the Wildwood Flower. Again, just from hearing Uncle Ern play it, and that always seemed to be quite exciting whenever we'd have company over and they'd get me to play that tune.
Was that on an adult guitar?
Oh, yeah.
So your legs wouldn't hit the ground. You must have had to reach around the guitar.
Yeah, you just sort of figure it out. I remember that. So it was Uncle Ern on that side, and then on my mother's side there was Aunt Mame, and she was kind of like a country diva. Again, this is back in the era, which almost seems unbelievable now, but where like musicians could actually make like a good living playing live music around Newfoundland only. You wouldn't have to tour. Like, the tour would be to go from Clarenville into St. John's, or that's where she was based down around Clarenville. So Aunt Mame, you know, she was like basically a country star, and she'd be playing all the weddings and bars on, you know, around Newfoundland mostly. And but what I remember about with her is one time I went down to their house and just opened the door, and it was the equipment room. So there was like amplifiers and guitars, and they used to have this. It was like I guess it was like an early drum machine. Because again, back in those days, that's when you had this kind of classic sound. And Sim and I were the ones who really started it, where you'd have like a drum machine going in the background, and you'd kind of play along with it to get a bigger sound. And so they'd have that, and also this kind of other setup where there were like these. The guitar player Reg would play the guitar. He'd also kind of program and set up this whole backing track thing, and he'd play bass with his feet. Kind of like an organ, so like your classical, like church organ. You actually play with your two hands and your feet, and he had this thing set up where he'd play the guitar and he'd play the bass with his feet.
Wow.
But I just remember looking at all that and like just being, you know, almost like the light was shining from the instruments, and you know, that's definitely a magical moment where it all just was more enchanting again.
And you knew then that this is it for you?
I mean, I was definitely very excited and interested in it all. Yeah.
Yeah. You remember your first gig?
First gig, like getting paid to play,
Yeah,
I guess.
getting paid to play.
Jeez, I hadn't actually thought of that. The first gig, I don't remember. No, it was probably because I went off to university as well. I don't think I really got into playing, you know, professionally, I guess, until around the university years. And I mean, I guess it's fair to say I'm fairly shy. So definitely during all that earlier kind of formative years of, you know, elementary school and high school, I was just really just into the music. It wasn't really about performing or any of that kind of stuff. It was just a fascination with kind of music itself and the instrument and that kind of intimate way of relating to it.
Yeah. Tell me about your academic journey. What was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, number one, I mean, I probably learned the most from my parents. You know, I have to thank them the most because they were just incredibly supportive from the very beginning. You know, and even though if I got perhaps even a little obsessive, maybe, you know, other parents may have been concerned, like Dwayne's just in his room playing his guitar all the time. But they saw it was a good thing for me. I guess in the relationship I did have with it, they saw it was a good thing. So they, you know, just super supportive the whole time. And we went. So my father was a teacher, and he went to do his master's in New Brunswick. Coincidentally, we're just back from a great time in Fredericton, New Brunswick, from the ECMAs. And that's where we lived for like half a year. So I did half of grade 8 in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And again, you know, that's, you know, kind of those early teen years where things can get, you know, a little emotionally turbulent, and, you know, people can have some struggles. I'm sure we all go to it to some degree. But again, my parents saw that the guitar was something that was helping me get through all this. So even though the Christmas before that, so the Christmas of grade 7, I think it was, I got my first electric guitar from the Sears catalog. That was very exciting. After being
you had an amp?
Oh yeah, a little tiny plastic amp. Literally, it was this big, and, you know, probably cost $15 or something.
10 watts, maybe. What?
Maybe less. But again, I felt like I was on top of the world with all my gear. But when we went to New Brunswick, you know, I guess my parents saw the dedication I had, so that was kind of when we finished school that year. They took me down to Tony's Music Box, and I got to pick a guitar off the shelf, like no plastic involved in you know, I got a guitar and an amp up there.
Do you still have it?
It is, yep, back in Carbonear. Although the first one I got all curious and just took it apart one day. Like literally took every screw out just to see how is this put together. And it seems to have disappeared since then. But the one I got in New Brunswick, I still have that, an old Ibanez Roadstar 2.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, talking about the academic journey, so I got that guitar, and then I started getting into jazz music, because I remember being in Carbonear and driving along with my father and just flicking through the radio, and I just stopped on this one station because, again, it was music that just really intrigued me, and listened to it all the way home. And even he was like, "You don't like that music, do you?" I guess he hasn't really listened to jazz music that much. But But I went home and realized this was a weekly CBC radio show called Jazzland, and I used to religiously listen to that every week. And that was back in the day where you'd have a ghetto blaster. I don't know if that's the right term now, but like a portable cassette player, basically, that you could record a radio show onto. So if the radio show was on, you hit record on your tape deck, and you could tape off the show and listen to it later, because things were not on demand.
Yeah.
Dwayne, we're losing a whole generation
Imagine,
now, right?
yeah, imagine.
So I remember it well. Yeah. So you record jazz, and
I'd record those Jazzland shows and listen to them all week long, and then I learned or discovered a second CBC radio show that came out in the evenings. Jazzland was once a week. I can't remember if Jazz Beat was every night or just the weekends, but that was the second show, so I'd record that one as well. And then through that, just started to collect some jazz music. But all that to say, I started getting into jazz, and my parents, again, being super supportive, they managed to find a jazz guitar teacher in St. John's.
okay.
And then actually before that, even because they knew how interested I was, they, so kind of continuing that journey of following our father when he was working on his master's as a teacher. We also spent a little time in St. John's after we came back from New Brunswick, and that's where I got my first official regular guitar lessons. That evolved into jazz guitar lessons, and then when I finished high school, I just couldn't get enough of music still. They were pretty, I wouldn't say, forceful, but very much encouraging the university path.
Right.
And then I learned about this university in Antigonish, Nova Scotia called St. FX. So I went there and did the jazz program.
Okay.
So that was, first university after high school. But then after I finished the jazz program, I just really started getting interested in classical music. And we had a classical guitar group at St. FX. So even though it was a jazz program, the prof in our last couple of years was also an accomplished classical guitarist. So we started exploring some of that. That got me interested in classical music. So I started going to France and studying that, more of a focus. And there it was more composition, so, learning how to write music. So I went to a conservatory. First there was one in Paris and one down in Marseille. So I'd go back, basically I'd just go back and forth like every year. The first time I think I went for 7 months and then came home for a bit, then went back again for like 5 months, and then came home and went back again for like 4 months and then went back home. And eventually it got shorter and shorter and shorter, but I kept going back. I had some great teachers over there.
Dwayne, I got a question around that. When you say you were studying classical music, to be good at it, you need to spend a lot of time at it. Just give me a little thumbnail sketch as to what that meant when you were studying. Did you immerse yourself completely, or did you give some time to travel a little bit? Like, what was the experience like for you?
Yeah, again, for me, like, everyone is different, and you can have, varying ranges of sort of breadth of interest, I guess. But for me, like, I just couldn't get enough, and because there's something about, it was like, I haven't really thought about that before either, but kind of what is it that motivates someone to be that dedicated to someone? It is, because it is, I don't know if abnormal is the right word, but, like, I would easily there were days I'd spend 8 hours a day just working on things, because it is like it's like there's a game type quality to it where, like, you're getting better at the game the more you go along, so it's kind of accomplishment that way. But then there's an artistic side where it's like you're just getting this musical satisfaction, and the more that you get this kind of technical ability, it opens up more, the artistic relationship deepens as well. So, I think if you wanted to kind of scientifically study the rewards of music, it's a pretty rich endeavor.
So this sounds like a beautiful academic journey. Going to St. FX and doing that, and then off to France. You must have been just so excited to be in the moment doing that when you were that age.
Oh yeah, and again at that age too. So that'd be, I guess that was my 20s. And with that too, kind of getting that sense of adventure and traveling off to new lands. Although I didn't find travel to be as, even though I did travel a lot, it was still musically motivated. Like I went to Germany when I was over in France because I wanted to go to where J.S. Bach, spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
So it's just little things like that kind of. But it was always music at the motivation. But also, actually, I should, before I forget, because the academic journey didn't end there, so that would have been, I guess, around 2000 maybe was my last trip to France. But that's when I discovered the music of Django Reinhardt, which is a whole other topic. But still had those interests of jazz music and classical music and traditional Newfoundland music. And was still very interested. Writing music was always a big part of what I was interested in. And then my interest grew more into what you call color in sound. So music has a melody, so that's the thing that you would sing. Music has like a rhythm, so that's kind of the beat that you could tap or dance to. But then there are other kind of qualities of music. So you can talk about color, which is like if you took a voice but then added a violin to play the same melody, and then add a trumpet together with that. So you got these three different instruments that are playing the one melody, but it makes a different color of sound. So the way that instruments kind of can blend together, or you might have a group of instruments that are playing something that's really kind of soft and smooth, and you contrast them with a group of instruments that are playing something that's kind of pointy and jagged. So you get into like texture in sound. So I started getting really interested in those qualities of music, which got me interested in larger ensembles. So like an orchestra is a great example of how you can get a lot of color in music. So that got me interested in conducting, and then I went back to Mon. When was that? I guess I got to factor in the COVID year. So probably 6 years ago now, I did the Masters in Instrumental Conducting program at Mon. So even though it had been like 20 years or something since I'd been in university.
And that's where you showed up at Jazz East.
Yes, I was with Jazz East
Yeah.
for a bit there, but definitely, Bill was very gracious about let me explore some of the charts I was writing with the ensemble, and that's what I liked about that program is that because if you have these kind of ideas for bigger ensembles, like well, I'll just call up 40 people, and maybe we'll all get together tomorrow afternoon and play some tunes. It's not usually as simple as that because. Right. Trying to organize 2 people, can be a challenge enough.
What was it like to be in front of an 18-piece jazz orchestra like Jazz East? Because I was actually a trumpet player in that when you rotated through.
Yeah.
And I could tell you were into it.
Oh, yeah.
You got the musicians really into it as well. What was it like?
Well, I mean, with that, it's always... there's 2, it's like extreme excitement because, this music that you've been hearing internally... conceiving of and developing, and you're crafting it, but you're never actually really hearing it because you can't. You're just imagining it really, or you have a vision. But then when you actually get to an ensemble, you're hearing it come to life for the first time. So that's a thrill. But then at the same time, there's always the things you didn't expect. There's always a learning, some kind of learning part of when you take a piece of music and have it performed for the first time. So yeah, I definitely remember that from that situation as well.
Your appetite for lifelong learning is impressive too. You just don't want to stop.
Well, I mean, some advice I got a while ago was follow the music. It was John Wire, who was a percussionist that lived here for a while. And all this, as you go through life, you can kind of hit some spots where maybe you start to wonder, what am I doing? And that one always kind of rings out for me, follow the music. So yeah, I don't really think, why am I doing this? It's just, I can keep doing this.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
More people should take that advice in life, follow the music. That's great. So that's a beautiful academic journey and a really interesting pathway to bring you into your professional journey. So talk to us professionally. When did you get involved in?
Yeah, so professionally, again, if we want to use the definition of professional as, I guess, getting paid for your skills or your services, then that'd be around when I got out of university, and because then I'm out of school, so the bubble has burst. It's like, oh yeah, I gotta earn a living somehow.
What's next?
But I mean, I was again, perhaps bohemian would be the term for the lifestyle I was enjoying at the time. So didn't need a lot of money, and wasn't really interested in it. I just wanted to, be able to keep realizing the musical interests that I had. But I remember back then, so I'd just start playing in some different bands. And actually, I remember when I first got out of university and I spent a little time around Halifax, because that's kind of was the closest center to Antigonish, where the university was. So me and another buddy of mine that was in the music program, we started a guitar duo, mixing kind of jazz and classical music. So I definitely remember playing like some weddings, some cafes. That was Ned Milburn. And then I moved back home because my father actually became sick. He had a brain hemorrhage. So moved back just to kind of help deal with all of that. So then I was back home, but then started picking up, again, mostly just through some friends. You start to play music with some people, and then, then you'll find someone else who's looking for a guitar player or different things like that. But just kind of, started getting, I guess, more involved with the scene back here in St. John's. So that'd be kind of the mid-90s. And then there were a few bands. What were some bands from back then? Jenny Gear and the Whiskey Kittens, Danette Eddy. We had a band called The Discounts. Actually, now that I think of it, because my brother's a drummer as well, and he's like maybe 4 or 5 years younger than me. And he went to Mon. So during that time, we actually overlapped living in town together. And it feels like we played in a gazillion bands. Like, I'm sure there's at least 1 week where we played the Ship every night or something like that. So we played in a lot of, actually, I think
One phone call will get the Andrews brothers out, right?
I think all those bands I just mentioned, both of us were in them. Anyways, it was a whole slew of, basically just playing, it was all kind of small scale, and we didn't have really big, aspirations or business plans or any of that kind of stuff. Right. It was just playing music, actually be able to make enough of a livelihood to keep, a 20-odd-year-old satisfied. But then my son was born, so that was probably the biggest turning point.
Okay.
And that was 2006. So that's when I started to get more, So, I was fine on my own, but now, having basically a family to start to care for, that definitely changed my attitude towards things. And actually my first instinct was like music isn't going to work for this type of context, just because, I know what it's like in the music world up to this point at least, and, it just didn't seem like a good idea to, put the care of a child, in such precarious circumstances is the right way to look at it. But my partner, she's fantastic. So, and again, she's just been super supportive. She's like, nope, we'll figure this out. You keep going. And, if we reach a point where it's not working, we'll deal with it then. But, let's not start saying no.
Right.
That's great support.
Yeah. And so then, I took that, and, certainly that was inspiring. So then I just kept going, but got more, I guess you could say, more serious about, the business side of it. And I remember we were up in Halifax, we were doing a little tour, and this is after I'm starting to get more serious, but don't really know what to do. And I think that's still a question pretty much everyone in the music business is faced with, especially today, which is that no one really knows what to do in the music business. Like, to boil it down to advice, I guess, for me, after what I've been through up to this point, the only thing that I can say with any kind of certainty is if you do stuff will happen. If you don't do anything,
right,
nothing will happen. But you can't really get much more precise than that.
Right.
I love that, Alan. Isn't that great?
Well, entrepreneurs say the same thing.
Really?
They use different terminologies, but they say the same thing. Just keep picking away and do things and be open to saying yes to things, and things will happen.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
And it's always, even if you do start and, you have some kind of direction, so you're here and you think you're going to go there, usually you end up over there somewhere.
Right.
And you never even knew you wanted to go over there, but the only way you get to where you didn't know you wanted to go, which is great, which was over there, is by starting to go over there.
Yeah.
That's what, usually happens. But I just wanted to go back, because I do remember when I was starting to get serious about it all, but didn't really have any sense of what to do. I was at a friend's house when we were on tour, and she was studying business at Dal. And on her table in her living room was a big book called Marketing. So I'm like, all right, people have probably figured this out, or at least generally how to, how to go about things. So I started reading a marketing textbook, and I found that really helped to kind of tune things up for, the business, professional side of things.
Well, because marketing is a creative process as well, right?
Yeah.
Marketing is, maybe accounting can be creative too, but although I'm not sure how, but marketing certainly can be a creative process. So it resonated with you, did it?
Big time, because what it was like was, as I would go through different things, like, because funding is, especially in Canada, we're great to have such support from both the provincial and the federal governments. With organisations like Music NL right here, or with Factor, Canada Council. But with all those, systems, I mean, you have to create a proposal and you have to submit and, describe what you're going to do. So I'd done that previously and was even successful, but it was all just by kind of, well, this is what I'm doing. Does this work? But then when I realized what's in a marketing textbook, it's like, oh yeah, just put all this together and kind of focus it this way and get a timeline going. And so then it made all that side of things, just more clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Dwayne, I love the way that you describe your journey, and the whole way through you pepper in all the supports you've had in life, whether it's your parents, your spouse, even the government. You acknowledge that everybody around you is trying to help you succeed. It's a beautiful thing to hear. What are you doing in the moment? What are you doing right now?
Right now, I'm sitting here talking with you.
Yeah.
And I enjoy this concept as well of the moment. And we've been having a lot of talk around our house about the mind and quality of mind. And you can have a protective mind, you can have a neutral mind, you can have a possibility mind. And a lot of us, especially today, are actually stuck in our protective mind, especially considering what we've just been through globally. So just being aware of things like that. So one of the things I'm doing in the moment is working on being aware of my quality of mind, which really is, I guess, what your quality of mind is in the moment. So I like that question, and my answer is I'm right here speaking with you.
You're right here, right now. I like the answer. Do you meditate? You seem like a guy that meditates.
Yeah. Very much enjoy that, because that's a great way to get your neutral mind balanced,
right? Or
get all your minds, just get that internal balance.
Yeah.
And I've also been studying something called body mapping. So as a musician, especially one of my age, we'll say, physically there's a lot of demands, and even though if you watch someone perform, some people are more animated than others, but it's actually a very physical, movement-based activity. But the movements are small, so you don't really see them. But the amount of movement that happens in a musician's fingers during a performance is quite involved. And then the way that your whole body posture contributes to support this, is often underestimated, and people end up with bad habits. And over time, it can get strained to the point where you get an injury. So I've had all kinds of injuries in the past. But the latest thing I've found, which really does feel like it's been I can't describe how helpful it's been for me. It's just been incredible. Is this approach called body mapping, which is all about balance and really all about just realizing that your body has a natural balance to it. And when you tune into that, or when you're aware of that, you're in a neutral. Again, we're talking about neutral mind. You can also have a neutral body, but usually we're not in a neutral posture. Usually our heads will pull forward, especially the more, if you're on a computer a lot or a phone, the tendency can be to have what's called a downward pull. So just being aware of that actually brings a whole bunch of natural balance back into your physical system. I forget why I started going on about that, but I think it had to do with meditation. Right. Oh, so part of my latest, research in the body mapping world brought me to a book on neuroplasticity. It's just the way that the brain works. To summarize everything that I've read in this book, that's about this big. Your brain keeps on developing. There's hope. It used to be thought that you learned everything when you were younger, and then as you get older, you actually can't learn.
Right.
As you get older, that's not true anymore,
right,
according to the latest science. But as I was reading that, it got into a whole section about. This one was about light. And how I think it's called the pineal gland, which is like in the middle of your brain, which is related to like birds and lizards. I think have it more in the front of the brain. But even though it is inside, it's an internal gland. It's actually sensitive to light. So we think of light as something that we only experience through our eyes, or maybe a little bit on our skin. But our body actually responds to light on a deeper level, literally. So this all goes back to this idea of, we talk about meditation, like a lot of it hasn't really been proven by scientific, Western scientific methods, but it's starting to be. So even if you look at, meditation, if you go back, say, take the yoga system, where it talks about energy centers and the way that energy flows through the body, that pretty much maps onto at least the nervous system. which took a while for Western science to, kind of prove. But, the ancient Eastern scientists settled that, a while ago and built their system on it. So, yes, I love meditation, and, what I find kind of most striking these days is how much Western science is starting to accept and prove and realize there's a lot of good that comes from that simple practice.
100%. Tell me about your Ucma experience last week.
Ucmas were fantastic. Again, great to go back to New Brunswick and Fredericton especially. Having lived there a little bit in grade 7 and grade 8. I think definitely the highlight for me was getting to play with a fiddle player who's from those parts named Ray Legier. So with the ECMAs, the ECMAs is a music conference, so maybe not everyone understands what goes on there, but basically, musicians will go up, you'll probably perform a little bit here and there, and, it's actually a really strong business foundation to it, and they got a fantastic thing called the international, I forget the official term for it, like the export, it's an export project basically, so you can meet someone from Germany who books a festival, and they're looking for someone who maybe specializes in swing jazz from the 1930s with traditional Newfoundland music. And then I'll go and I'll play my set, which is swing jazz from the 1930s with traditional Newfoundland music. And he goes, "Oh, this is great. I'd love to book this." So that goes on, in varying degrees at the ECMAs. So we did a showcase on the Friday afternoon. But also, there's a fair bit of expense and, an investment has to go into that. So it just didn't work out for me to be able to bring like the full band from here, say, for example. But an old friend of mine who I played with back in 2004, when I released my first album in 2004 and did a show in Sackville, New Brunswick. And the presenter was like, there's actually a fiddle player who lives across the street, do you mind or would you be interested if he came over to sat in for a bit? He's great. I had no idea who he was referring to. But I was like, yeah, sure, So he comes over and it's Ray Legier. And, Django Reinhardt's music, which is what I'm big into, is fairly intricate. And we just didn't even, no talk of how we're going to approach anything. We just started playing together, and right away it was just incredible. So that was my first experience with Ray Legier. And then we had a couple of hellos, just over, the internet over the years, but hadn't actually played together until last weekend. So at the ECMAs, Ray came up and he played that showcase with us again. So it was great to, and that's another good thing about the ECMAs.
18-year gap, and you come right back at it.
Exactly. And same sort of thing. We just, we met up, an hour before the set started, and we just sort of ran a few tunes. But he is, there's not a bad note in him. Like, it's just really incredible to, but again, very humble and very, he lives in Sackville, New Brunswick, and, he's got his life there, and he's kind of, I don't know how to explain it. But if you get a chance to check out Ray, you will not be disappointed.
I know you got to go, but I do have a question, music geek question.
Sure.
You talked about intricate music. I love Chuck Mangione and Feels So Good. It's my favorite song.
Yeah.
I've been working on that for 40 years.
Yeah.
I can't play it.
Yeah.
Is there any passage or any piece of music that you, as a professional musician, have been working on and you just can't get?
Yes.
So,
all kinds. I think
that fascinates me. A guy who's a professional musician, I would look at you, Dwayne, and say, he can play anything. So you have a piece that you're still working on for years?
Yes, and I ask the same question that you just asked me. I ask it to the musicians that I asked it to Ray. It's like, so Ray, it feels like you can play anything, right?
Yeah.
Like and he can on the guitar and the fiddle and the mandolin. It sounds like it, but he's like, when we played that last chorus, like I felt, my phrasing was off by half a beat, and it didn't really land where I wanted to, and the tone wasn't quite sitting, So I think every musician always has that inner. It's part of the creative process too, because you have a vision that you're realizing, which means it isn't achieved yet, which means it's dynamic and it's always changing, and there's. You can get pretty precise and, get pretty consistent in the way that you do something, but there's always going to be small variations, and there's always going to be new ideas. So I think that's a natural part of it. You can probably get to a level where it sounds like you've got every note figured out, but I think there's always combinations and
Well, you know what amazes
context.
me, and I don't know if you feel this way, when you listen to someone like Chuck Mangione play it, and it seems so effortless, and then I'm like 40 years trying to get this thing, and I can't.
I suggest check out body mapping.
Yeah?
Because that's one of the things about this body mapping system as well, is that it's all about the natural balance that your system can have. And usually, it's the Ray Legiers and the Chuck Mangionis and the Vladimir Horowitz and the Django Reinhardts, like the people that look like, everyone else refers to them as masters because when they play, they just make it look so effortless. Right. But that's because they've probably got a natural balance that facilitates that. Whereas if you're someone who's struggling, and especially if it's something that you've been working on for a long time and you're still struggling, often it means that there's an inefficiency or an imbalance or there's a mismapping in your system that's actually causing a limitation that you're not aware of. Because a lot of people study body mapping because they have pain, so you're just trying to get relief from your pain. So it might be tendonitis in your elbow and you realize that you're twisting your arm in the wrong way. So that's usually what draws people to body mapping. But then once you get into it, you can realize that there were limitations that you weren't aware of, and you use body mapping to help remove those limitations.
I will be doing some research.
There you go, yeah. Dwayne, what's over the horizon for you?
Over the horizon, I see lots of stuff out there. My main focus is right now, yes, because it is plural, there's an album of music by the great Django Reinhardt, so it's all recorded, but again, like everyone in the music business, so much is changing, everyone's trying new approaches, so in the old days you would have made an album and released it and manufactured it and probably would have sold it. That's changed. So we still make albums, but streaming is now the dominant way that people consume music. So I'm just exploring a new way of releasing music that kind of fits more in the way that things are happening in that context. So we recorded the album. I've been releasing singles monthly, so that's like one track at a time, which is funny because that's actually a full circle type of thing too, because singles is how music was originally released back when recordings first started. So actually releasing the fourth single from that this Saturday, and then I'll keep releasing them until October, and then I'll put the full thing out on vinyl. And that's taken, Django Reinhardt recorded over 1,000 pieces of music, and during the pandemic, because one thing I always talked about doing was like, it'd be great if I could just clear my schedule and just go and listen to everything Django ever recorded. So I actually did that when the first lockdown happened. And from that, there's 100 original pieces, and then I kind of whittled that down to my favorites, or it's like Django's greatest hits of his original tunes, according to me. So there's 10 tracks. So took the 1,000 tracks, got them down to 10, or down to 100 originals, and took my favorite 10 of those, and that's an album called Djangology, the study of Django, which is the name of one of his tracks.
Right.
Listen. And I'll throw a few more things out as well, because we also have the Swingin' Bells, which is a swing band that we have for children, and we call it the Young and the Young at Heart.
I've seen you guys.
Yeah, so it's pretty fun, and actually most of our playing for the summer is coming through that, and we're just slowly starting to get back out on the road again. So playing a lot with the Swingin' Bells. Also got some commissions that I've written that are coming to realization. So basically still just writing and playing and exploring music.
What a beautiful journey you've had, and you're in the middle of as well. What would a piece of advice be for a young person out there looking at this, or somebody's even looking at picking up?
I'd say again, I'll go back to it because we did mention it early, but follow the music. Great piece of advice, because that gives you a nice clear path, and it answers so many questions. And because really, like, there are so many questions, and everyone's context is unique, so everyone's going to be met with a unique set of challenges, I suppose you could say, and you got to find your own solutions. No one can tell you what to do, so you got to figure it out. So that's always been like a good, when things get kind of confusing or like, what are we doing anyway, just follow the music comes back, and enjoy it is a good one as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jerry?
You know what, Dwayne, as an amateur musician, I've been exposed to a lot of musicians in my life, and I can tell you this, Alan, I love being around musicians. You've epitomized I get goosebumps listening to you. You're so alive, and I see that in musicians. And I think what we're trying to do with our podcast, Gale Force Winds, and thank you to the Music NL for giving us the opportunity to bring your thoughts to people. Just a pleasure listening to you talk.
Pleasure's mine.
Well, what a wonderful conversation here on Gale Force Winds, and I can tell you, you can feel your passion, and to watch your eyes light up as you talk about things, it's really quite inspirational. And the way you speak about people supporting you through life, it's really nice to hear. And I can tell you that this has been a wonderful conversation for us. Thank you, Music NL, for supporting us in this effort to get these stories out there. I think people need to hear these things, and I know this for certain. The world needs more Dwayne Andrews. Thank you very much.
Definitely, the world needs more music. I'll finish on that note, because I mean, talking about science and ancient mystic wisdom and that type of stuff. I mean, music has always been acknowledged as something that it just gives such a wonderful quality to life. And even I think scientifically, if you play the piano in your sight reading, then your brain is the most active it's ever been. Or it can be, something like that, because you're using both sides and ins and outs. And then also look at things like, the business world these days. I'll relay this one as a short end note here, but I don't know how many details I can get into, but there's a consultant basically who was working I think he was in Eastern Europe, and he was, working in high-level finance. And the CEOs were like, we need people who are creative, we need people who are team players, we need people who are dedicated and motivated, and this consultant was like, you need musicians. So even the training that musicians get, especially at say a university level, it just serves in so many ways, for other aspirations that you might go on to. So follow the music.
Well, Alan, you know what? In business, if a guy is going to go to his room and play the guitar for 8 hours, surely to God he can be focused in the business world. So yeah, I just love the juxtaposition of business and music. So that's something, that's a whole other 2 or 3 hour podcast.
There you go.
Again, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Wayne.
Thank
Absolute
you.
pleasure.